Welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Cara, fundraising coach here at DonorBox. And I feel like today's intro music should be some sort of Frank Sinatra song. But today, the Nonprofit Podcast brings you a 2-for-1 from New York City, where I get to talk to Josiah Haken, the CEO of City Relief. City Relief mobilizes thousands of volunteers every year as they compassionately serve individuals and families struggling with homelessness. What I love most is they have an innovative approach to delivering hope and resources to the communities who need it most, with the goal of walking alongside those looking for life transformation. And I will also say from my personal experience that those looking for and those who find personal transfer or life transformation aren't always the individuals seeking shelter and a warm meal. It's often those who step in to serve. So, a full disclosure, I've been a volunteer with this amazing organization for a number of years. And when Josiah started his own podcast, Neighbors with No Doors, I knew we had to have him on the Nonprofit Podcast. And today we do in a shared interview where I get to ask him about City Relief and learn about homelessness. So settle in and get ready for some gritty reality. And I am very eager to get this conversation started. So, Josiah, you say in your intro to your podcast, Neighbors with No Doors, that you want to spend time with people who have experienced homelessness and learn from industry experts. The first time I heard this, I thought, oh my gosh, you are the expert everyone needs to know. And I felt strongly that you needed to be the guest seat in your own podcast. So I guess I'm taking this over today because I want to hear from you and learn from you. And I will honestly say that I have been feeling like a kid at Christmas time. I've been waking up at night and thinking about questions I want to ask you. So I really want to learn more from you today.
Well, it is a joy to be here, Cara. Always, any chance I get to hang out with you and talk about these things is always a pleasure. Your work and your volunteering and your investment in our work over the years has just been inspiring to me. I know it's kept me going sometimes through the rough stretches. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And again, I'm excited for my listeners at the Neighbors with No Doors podcast to get a chance to hear from me answering questions instead of being the one asking them.
Right. I will start with this. My one of my very favorite musicals that it has lyrics. It says, "New York City is the greatest city in the world. The skyline is iconic. It's the backdrop of some of my very favorite movies. But it's a gritty city too. And it's not for the faint of heart. I've learned that firsthand. So my question for you is, why New York?"
So I would even say I didn't choose New York. New York chose me. I grew up in West Africa as the son of missionaries. And then we moved when I was in high school to Hershey, Pennsylvania. And then from there, I just started sort of finding opportunities to get involved in different places. And I tease people, I had an Uber driver who was from Guinea the other day, and we were chatting. And he said, I told him, I was like, you can take the kid out of Africa, but you can't take Africa out of the kid. And so my first day serving with City Relief was in East Harlem, right in front of an African hair braiding salon, which allowed me to feel right at home from where I grew up. So I love New York City. It's an international city. It has a gravitational pull, so people come from all over the world. Different. There's an energy to it. There's it is one of those cities that will chew you up and spit you out if you're not able to kind of keep up with the pace, and it does have some grit to it depending on where you go. I mean, there's the glam of Midtown and Broadway and Times Square, but then there's the outer boroughs. There's parts of Harlem and Manhattan even where there's just a lot of pain and a lot of neglect. New York City is, I think, the city with the most billionaires of any city in America.
Really?
And the city with the most homeless people of any city in America. So you have this wide divide of just this, just surplus of resources, and then this lack, and it's right on top of each other. So that's why New York, especially with the work that I do.
Wow. So you mentioned you can take the kid out of Africa. You cannot take the Africa out of the kids. So what is unique about the homelessness crisis in the US compared to poverty around the world?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things is just the discrepancy, the just the cognitive dissonance of a country with so much wealth and so much access. I mean, and then at the same time, so much need and so much poverty and people who are hurting. So it's the discrepancy. I mean, I think people come to the United States like with this idea of pursuing the American dream, and in New York City, if you fly into JFK and then you take a train to Penn Station, you'll get out of the train and you'll be stepping over people who are sleeping on the ground. And I think that there is a challenge in that. There's like I think people from other countries even are going, "What the heck? Why is this happening in the United States? Why are they allowing this to take place?" And I think, even if you look at talk to kids, I mean, if you bring kids into New York and you walk around with them, they'll ask the question, why? What is happening? Why is it okay? Why is this okay? Why are we tolerating human beings who don't have access to food and clothing and shelter and housing in a country where there is an abundance of all of those things? So I think that is one of the most unique features of homelessness in America, is that everybody who kind of is able to think critically is able to look at this and go, it doesn't make sense. There's a cognitive dissonance there.
Okay, so when we think about the unhoused community, what do you think is the main reason people fall into homelessness, especially in New York City, but maybe other areas of the United States as well? It's not something that they wake up one day and hope they get to do.
Yeah, and I think but I honestly, I think that's the kind of the misconception. I think a lot of people in America and other in Europe and elsewhere have this idea that homeless people want to be homeless, that they don't, that they're service resistant, that they don't actually desire a place to call their own, or they don't want to work for it. And so it's a problem, because the leading cause of homelessness in America, in based on the research I've done and based on what I've seen, is cost of living. If you look at the cost of living in the United States, it's skyrocketed over the last 20-30 years, and there has not been a wage that increase that has kept up. So if you look at the wage, the living wage of the average American, it's way a living wage is way above what the actual minimum wage is, or about what people actually make. So there's this huge gap between the ability to afford a home or an apartment and the ability to pay for it by working a low wage job. So in New York specifically, the cost of living is outrageous. It's just so expensive, and so you can't live on $40,000 a year. It's just impossible. And so people are being priced out of their apartments, and then gentrification is a huge deal. I mean, so like when everyone there was the white flight, all the white folks who left the urban areas and went into the suburbs, and then there was this retraction where a lot of those white folks who actually moved into the suburbs, their kids ended up moving back into the cities, because that's where all the energy was, that's where the jobs were, that's where the tech industry is, that's where fashion and commerce. And so all these people started moving back. So if you look at Brooklyn, or you look at Harlem, and even now the South Bronx, these are areas that used to be primarily minority communities, but have been gentrifying, and the pricing has gone up, and that's pushed a lot of people into the margins, into the shelter system, and into the streets. So and then so contrary to the belief that homeless people are just addicts, or they're just mentally ill and that's why they're out in the street, the leading reason in my view is that it's just a lack of affordable housing and a wage gap that hasn't kept up. But there's other factors as well. Again, the one thing I tell people a lot is, if you've met one homeless person, you've met one homeless person. So every person has a unique story, and it's impossible to paint with a broad brush.
Many organizations serve the homeless across the United States, large cities, small cities. What makes City Relief different? What just tell us a little bit more about what you do and what the model is.
We are a mobile outreach program. So when I say mobile, I mean we don't have a building. We don't have a drop-in center yet. We don't even have an office at this point. But we have these vehicles. We have buses that have been customized. We have airport shuttles that have been customized. And what we do is we make a meal with soup that's been donated by Park 100 Foods, which is a great company that gives soup, that makes the soup for Panera and Wendy's and a number of other huge companies. And they donate the soup to us, the ingredients, and then we make it fresh every day. And we get rolls donated by a local bakery in Newark called Teixeira's. And we get socks donated by Bombas, which are the best socks in the world as far as I'm concerned. And we take these supplies and we go to where we know the people are. We know people who are struggling. We know we can identify locations that are strategically, centrally located. So, for example, we identify areas where there's other direct services for homeless folks involved. We identify areas that are accessible by public transit. We identify areas that are proximate to train stations and subway stations where we know people are hanging out who are stuck and struggling. And so we go to where they are and we create these sort of parties. We have these block parties where we take our vehicles in, we set up on the sidewalk. We have tables and chairs for people to sit down and eat and relax and just be, treated with some really good and really high-end customer service by our volunteers and by our staff. And then what we do is we leverage this party and this experience, this pop-up experience, to build relationship and trust with folks who are on the margins or people who are hurting. Many of them are street homeless. Many are in shelters. Many are not homeless yet. Some are just economically insecure or food insecure. Last Friday or 2 Fridays ago, we met a woman on the sidewalk who, as she was just standing there, we rolled up and she had just lost her job that morning. And she was just in tears. She was just sitting there, and kind of despondent, like just sort of, what do I do now? I wasn't planning on this. And our outreach vehicle just rolled up right to where she was, parked, unloaded, and this party sort of developed around her. And she ended up talking to me about the fact that she lost her job and she wanted help, accessing where she get food pantry information. And we collected her contact information, because the other piece that we do as an organization is we understand that a party, a transaction, a meal is only the first step. Homelessness is not solved in a transaction. Most people, it takes years to fall into homelessness. And honestly, unfortunately, it often takes just as long to get out of it. So what we try to do is we try to provide that sort of holistic net, where if someone comes for the meal or a pair of socks or just the music, or someone lost their job and they just want someone to talk to, we will then always leverage that interaction to point them to additional services, to our follow-up team, who will circle back with people. During the pandemic, we got people phones so we could stay in touch with them. We have implemented a hotel program. So if someone's in the street in the winter and temperature's going to drop below 32 degrees, we will put someone up in a hotel for a few nights so they don't risk freezing to death. And then again, everything is about that next connection. So at City Relief, we tell people we create connections for people who are at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness, because the bureaucracy of getting help when you're stuck in that vortex is incredibly challenging. And just having an ally and an advocate who can not only point you to the right place, but also advocate for you along the way is sometimes the difference between someone making it and not.
I love that visual of this woman sitting there and this street party pops up around her. And I will just add that street party is spot on. There's music playing that makes you feel like you're maybe at a Starbucks or Hobby Lobby. You're met with friendly people, the best soup in town, the best bread. Oh my goodness. Quality socks that are just amazing. So there's this unique model. You're on the front lines. You're going into gritty areas. You're going into hot areas in the summer with not a lot of refreshment. But you are showing up week after week after week. And so there's two questions I want to ask about this model. You mentioned the volunteers that show up, and then the quality of service that you're providing to the people that come and who might be hungry or cold or just need a little help. So from what I see, there's two parts of this scenario. And I think there's more that play into it, but two that I want to talk about. So let's talk about the dignity. You mentioned the Panera level of soup, the quality products. Talk a little bit why you're intentional about this.
For so many reasons. I mean, I'm convinced that that the dignity that we offer people is the key to gaining the credibility that we need to help them. So many people in the homelessness services world are trying to do as much as possible with as little as possible. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to stretch finite resources so thin that the people they serve end up getting leftovers or getting, the torn clothing or the dirty clothing in the donation bin, or and too often we treat homeless people as responsible for their situation. And whether we know it or not, if we don't offer them the dignity of our best or the highest quality items, what we'll be doing is we'll be accidentally reinforcing the systemic belief that homeless people deserve less. And so for us, we have to counter that narrative intentionally and right out of the gate. So everything we do in terms of creating this environment that's so dignifying, that's high touch, customer service to the max, what we're doing, in my view, is we're actually sort of interrupting the cycle and the narrative around what these people are worth. And so, because by communicating to people that they are worth our best, what we can then do is remind them that they are worth their own best. They are worth putting in the effort themselves. One story that epitomizes this for me is from years and years ago. A gentleman named Willie, who was homeless in New York City for 40 years. That's 40. And he would come to our outreach every week, and he would get his soup, and he would sit down on the ground, and he would not talk to anybody. He just ate his soup and kept to himself. But one day a volunteer ended up insisting, her name was Jean, she ended up insisting on talking to Willie and asking him his name and finding out what his story was. And she built a relationship. She volunteered with us every week. And so she got to know him and found out eventually that he was in the hospital. He had a health issue, and ended up in the hospital. And so she arranged to get balloons and, got some people together, and they all went to the hospital to visit Willie. And he described the story in one of our events, that by saying when she walked in with the balloons, when she walked in with this, this dignity and offered that to him, the way he phrased it was, he said, if she believed in me, maybe I could believe in myself. And this is a dynamic that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that you can lend faith, you can lend hope, you can lend belief to other people. It's something that you can actually give people, even when they don't believe it themselves. They don't have any faith, they don't have any hope. But if you have it for them, you can lend it to them. But it has to have tangible, it's got to be experiential. It can't just be theoretical or just, words. So by giving people the best, by offering the dignity of choice, by saying it's not like, take what I'm giving you, it's, you may have this or this. What would you prefer? That simple act of saying it's your choice, you tell us what you want, it communicates, and I think it fans the flames of belief that I actually deserve to have choice. So for us, it's and again, as an outreach organization, if we're going to connect someone from point A to point B, we have to have credibility to be able to encourage people to do that. So it's also very pragmatic. I mean, it's philosophical, it's theological, but it's also super pragmatic in that by giving people the best, we earn the right to speak into their lives and say, hey, is there any way we can help connect you? So we are able as an organization to build deep trust with people very quickly because we are offering them the best that we have to give.
Unleash maximum fundraising potential with DonorBox Premium. Together with our world-class donation tracking and analytics, you'll enjoy priority support in under an hour. This comprehensive suite of premium services and integration tools includes Zapier for process automation, MailChimp for all-in-one customer communication, and easy text-to-give shortcodes to scale up mobile giving. All this guided by exclusive expert support from our fundraising coach, tech wizards, and your very own dedicated account manager. DonorBox Premium, helping you help others.
That reminds me of a story. I've been at the bus and serving alongside you and your amazing team. And sometimes you can just tell that somebody's coming in feeling a little agitated. Maybe they're looking for a fight. And usually when I'm there, it's hot. Everyone's a little uncomfortable. There's a line. You're hungry. And there was one time somebody came in just on fire, just a little angry. And I look over and our mutual friend, Debbie, this tiny little grandma, had the situation diffused. So at this point, she's offered him a cold lemonade. She's welcomed him into this party on the street, just like she would welcome me into her house. And she's asking him questions. What's your name? Oh, can I get you some socks? Wanting to know more about him and making him comfortable. And she de-escalated a man that was larger than her in seconds because she saw him,
And I can, first of all, I can visibly see that scenario playing out because I know Debbie. I think I'm not even surprised. But secondly, I think, this is something where a lot of homeless services and homeless service providers miss the boat completely. They are wondering and sometimes confused, why are there fights in our building? Why are people so antagonistic and hostile? Now, I get it. Sometimes people, there's nothing you can do. They're just so angry and so traumatized. And it doesn't matter how great of an experience you give them, they're going to have issues. But one of the things I would point out though is that that's universal. That's not just homelessness. That's everybody. I've described a scenario where I was at a concert festival, this festival in Oceans. I forget where I was it was in New Jersey. I think it was Atlantic City or one of those areas one of those beach towns. And there was this festival and it was Dave Matthews Band was playing and it was going to be this incredible, and there's hundreds of people and we all paid this astronomical amount of money just to get into the festival. And sure enough, we get in there and there's a brawl happening all around. So all that to say is this is not unique to homeless people. They're everywhere you go. I mean, sports, how many fights have we seen at sports events, right? So there are people who you just can't, just having a bad day and the perfect scenario happens and they just can't be helped in that moment. However, I believe that the environment you create will be reflected in the respect and the attitude of the people you're serving. So there has been many times where people in the street have been instigated by someone else who was angry and having a bad day, but because they were at our event, because there was the music, our volunteers, the environment, they chose to walk away. I've seen people take a hit and walk away, which is unfathomable, because they didn't want to disrespect an environment that shows them so much respect. And so I'm convinced that if we created environments in our shelters and our services that were not just utilitarian, that were not just about transactions or getting people in a bed at the meal, if it wasn't just about distribution and it was actually about community and environment and dignity, I think we would see fewer fights. I think people would get on their feet faster. I think this idea that we shouldn't make shelters too comfortable or homeless people will never leave. That is a lie. I don't think that. I think that's completely backwards. I believe that if you made a shelter so dignifying that people would remember, like, oh wow, I am a human being made in the image of God, I might deserve better, they will aspire to something better for themselves. They, rather than sort of settling into this, well, I guess I'm just a homeless person who doesn't deserve any better. So all that to say is, the environment we create does, I believe, impact our ability to help people envision a better future for themselves and help them move forward, as opposed to the opposite, which I think is way too common in homeless services.
Well, you really do foster genuine friendships, genuine community, which you said builds that relationship and trust. But that takes me to my next question. So community, obviously it's the party at the bus on the sidewalk, but your community is actually nationwide. You have this immersive volunteer experience. People come and bring groups from all over the United States, probably all over the world. Why? Why do they choose to do that? Why do you choose to host them?
For a variety of reasons. For us, we know that our attempt to address homelessness on a macro level is a lot. It hangs more on the messaging and the experience of our volunteers than it even does on the interactions that we offer our friends in the street. So, for example, it's one thing for us to address homelessness in New York City by connecting, dozens of individuals every week to resources like shelter and programs and jobs and et cetera. That's very important, and it's life-changing work, and I'm proud of it, and we're going to keep doing it more and more and more, and hopefully in more places. However, we also understand that there are 330 million Americans, and if 10% of those folks were able to change how they viewed their homeless neighbors and have an interaction with their homeless neighbors, they may actually be able to get involved and make a difference in their own community. So we see our volunteer experience as an opportunity to educate, equip, and empower people who come and serve with us from all over the world to take what they experience in our events back home and then get involved right where they are. So we've seen this over and over again where people come out, they serve with us, they're like, oh wow, I can actually do this. This is something that's not that hard. Maybe we can get involved at home, maybe we can start something ourselves. And they end up taking the ideology and the practical things that we do back with them, and they adapt them for their own context. And so for us, we're able to make exponential impact on homelessness on a large scale that we wouldn't be able to if it was just us in the streets every day.
I mean, what's just one thing that I could do in my minivan to help my homeless neighbors? And what do you do?
For me, it's always been about acknowledging the people who are on the margins and identifying them and seeing them. One story that I've told probably hundreds of times, so you've probably heard this before, Cara, but is we used to do this outreach that we would, on Thursday evenings, we would take volunteers out around Penn Station, and we would break up into small groups and give them socks and hygiene kits and have them just engage people. And on one particular night, there was a woman who we saw regularly, named Maureen. I don't know if she's still alive. I don't know, or if she's in Vegas. She used to occasionally travel out to Vegas for random reasons. But she would have all these belongings all around her, these bags of stuff. And so we would engage her. And my colleague, Brett Hartford, was leading a team. And this is really his story I'm telling. But he described to me that Maureen asked him if he could watch her belongings while she went to the bathroom inside Penn Station. So he agreed and decided that it would be interesting to sit down right where Maureen was sitting and kind of see the world through her eyes for a few minutes. And what he described was looks from the people passing by of disgust, judgment, sneering, condescension. And it wasn't long before he was in tears because people assumed all the stuff was his. And so they were judging him and looking at him the same way they would have looked at Maureen. And so to me, the best thing we can do is, make eye contact, smile, nod your head, hey, say hello. That makes a big difference. That makes a huge difference in someone's, being able to process their experience as feeling invisible and feeling like we're like losing a sense of ourselves in homelessness. So just making eye contact is a huge thing, smiling, and acknowledging people, asking them how they're doing. If someone decides to see that as an opening to ask for money and you don't feel comfortable doing that, it's okay saying, oh, I'm sorry, not today. It's not a big deal, but just saying hello and acknowledging them is huge. If you want to take it a step further, another thing I do is I usually will carry a pair of Bombas socks with me in my briefcase or my backpack. I will sometimes carry a hygiene kit or gift cards to local fast food restaurants or coffee shops. I know another person, or I was introduced through the book I'm working on through the publisher I'm working with. He told me he has a friend that literally takes out $20 in ones every Monday, and his goal is throughout the week to give it away. So that's his. So he gives out $1 here, $1 there to people he meets on the street, and when he sees them panhandling or he sees someone on the side of the road, he gives them $1, and that's one of the ways that he just proactively tries to bring a little love and bring a little blessing to people's lives. And so I think there's all kinds of creative ways. I know another friend of mine, his daughter was, I think she was 8 or 9, when she started assembling toiletry kits for folks in the street, and she called them kindness kits. And she insisted that her parents stop the car when she saw someone on the side of the road, and she would get out and run it over and offer it to the person. And it changed not just their lives, but it also impacted her parents. And she actually ended up insisting that they come out and volunteer with us one week. They travel all the way from, I think they live in Kansas or somewhere in that area, and they came out and volunteered with us because their 8-year-old was insistent. We couldn't technically have her register as a volunteer, but it's a public street, so she came with her parents and hung out. But there's all kinds of things. I mean, again, I think acknowledging the humanity of the people around you. Again, be safe. I would always encourage people. Like, I'm a big guy, I'm not a small person. So I understand going into these conversations in these places may be a little easier for me than some. And I tell people all the time, just don't put yourself in a situation that would make you feel unsafe or uncomfortable. Maybe bring someone with you if you're worried. Another thing that a friend of mine recently said is maybe just leave 15 minutes early for where you're going, and anticipate that you may end up bumping into somebody who needs to talk. And that doesn't have to be a homeless person. Maybe it's a colleague. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's someone outside the grocery store. So I think there's all kinds of things that can be done that would make a huge difference in someone's life.
Wow, thank you. I imagine it is hard to reconcile that skepticism with hope sometimes. So thank you for being so transparent. Speaking of hope, is there any hope you can share? What are you seeing? Is there any inspiration right now?
Yeah, there's so many things. I mean, there's first of all, the younger generation of Americans are more activated and engaged on these kinds of issues than I think we've seen in previous generations. So at least for a while. And so I think that is something that gives me hope. I think that again, the way my kids are 10 and 8, and the way they are thinking about these issues, and the way young people are showing up to serve. And during the pandemic, we all our volunteers vanished, basically, except for a small group of young people who showed up every single day. And they ended up developing their own little community. They would go out to lunch after they served with us. And so I think that there's reason to hope that there are people who are really getting activated around this. I would also say that, just the press and the attention that's being given to the homelessness issue, I think, is encouraging. I know, a lot of people develop their stereotypes and their stigmas about issues based on what they see in the media. And I think that having more access to the realities of what would lead someone to fall into homelessness is really important. So it kind of, hopefully keeps the stereotypes down to a minimum. So yeah, there's reason to hope, and there's reason to believe that that we can do something about it. And again, as for my sake, every time I find out about someone who we helped, I'm encouraged. So I'm encouraged every day because I hear about stories of people who come to our outreaches and who my team is working with who are changing the world. So yeah, I have every reason to be optimistic.
Thank you for joining me on this conversation with Josiah. My only issue with this interview is that it just wasn't long enough. But as I mentioned, this episode is a twofer. Josiah will be broadcasting a longer version of this interview on his podcast, Neighbors with No Doors. We will unpack some of the issues we simply didn't have time for here. Plus, we'll talk a little about the book he's writing. The link is in the show notes, so head over and download it if this mission speaks to your heart as it does to mine. And I want to share a little bit of my own story with you too. When I first volunteered with City Relief, I thought I was the one giving. I thought I was showing up to serve soup. But the real work was done inside my own heart. I quickly learned that I was spending time with people who are stronger than I will ever be. They're survivors, they're fighters, they are overcomers. And every single person was worth the dignity they received when they came in need of a little help. So please head over to City Relief's website. The link is in the show notes for you, and you can find out more not only about what they do, but how they do it and what you can do to support them. The Nonprofit Podcast is here to amplify positive social impact. So you'll find us here with a new, inspiring, informative, and always interesting interview every Thursday. So follow, rate, and download the Nonprofit Podcast today, and be sure to join us next time. Until next time, stay inspired.
The Nonprofit Podcast, powered by DonorBox, helping you help others.